This doesn't appear to be a 100% Tucson car. I'm not sure where it came from, but there's definitely some rust in there. This is a 2011 GT500 Shelby Cobra Mustang. So we're gonna be doing some long tubes on it. I'm going to go get some PB Blaster or whatever to spray on the bolts for the headers, because I want to make sure all the bolts come off and we don't have any kind of crazy things going on. And since we were looking, so I don't know if you can see where my light is blindly shining in there, but down there is the manifold that we're going to be taking off, the OEM ones. So most likely, most of this is going to be done from underneath, with a little bit of it done from up here. But this is a quote-unquote tutorial to do long tubes on this by someone who's never done long tubes on this. So I'm going to tell you everything that bothers me and point out anything that might save your day in the future. This has I don't know what headers these are. Oh, they're JBA. Yo! They're the same ones that we hacked up to put on the red Mazda pickup that we're doing the LS in. So there's that. But they have some weird, so V-band, right? It makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to actually the V-band part, it's just a folded over tube, which I've never seen this before. I guess it's a cheap, easy way to make it, but hopefully it seals. Got the X pipe. Header number 1, which this is the driver's side, because it's got to go by the steering rack. Oh, it's got EGR as well. Oh, that's horrible. We're going to be putting this onto the exhaust. I'm guessing the factory X pipe is going to be where everything will meet up the way that it should. If not, we have a welder and they're gonna have to pay more, but hopefully JBA actually did their research and this just bolts up the way it should. First things first, before I lift this up and start taking stuff out from underneath, I'm actually going to pull the battery out and I'm going to pull the intake off, because if I do have to get stuff from up here, which it looks like either most of the manifold bolts or at least the top manifold bolts will be easier to get from above, I'll have extra room. With engine bays like this, you would think like, oh, it's American, you can get your hand in there. Like, no, this engine's the size of a small giraffe, so there's no room in the engine bay. So I'm just gonna take stuff out to make as much room as possible. Well, you can definitely see better in there, but it's just fucking rust. Yeah. So I'm gonna grab the PB and spray this, or the penetrating oil, and then we'll take off the other side, and hopefully the oil with a penetrant will help. Yeah. All right, we're gonna get the easy stuff out of the way, which is the stuff down here. The hard stuff is the manifolds on the cylinder heads. And from what it looks like, I was right about the, well, I guess it's an H pipe on this, but it's gonna be an X pipe that we're putting in. For this, they're gonna made up to here. We have the clamps and stuff like that, which are all rusty. I'm sure some of you are like, oh, that's not that much rust. I'm in Arizona. That's a lot of fucking rust. Wow, that is coming apart way better than I've ever had one of these exhausts come apart. We actually had a renter that was here doing this style, but it was on a Chrysler product. And we ended up just, he spent probably 30 minutes trying to beat it apart himself with a hammer. And I came along and 6 minutes of me beating it apart finally got them separated. And here we are with this, and it's literally falling apart. There we go. So the first one is working, which only means that later down the road I'm going to have ones that fight me and don't come off. You know, part of me was considering like unbolting it and like pulling up on the engine to try to get a little easier, but we'll see if we get there. We might not. I wanted to explain this part because this was the worst one out of it so far. This was the third bolt or nut, however it comes off for you. It's the one above the motor mount, above, what is this, a coolant line? Yeah. So it's the one way back in there. I had to use a variation of all of these tools in order to get this out. So the deep socket I used first, the shallow socket I used to get the rest of it out. And then I actually had to use this little 3/8 stubby to get it the rest of the way out because of the restriction of area in there. So far, that's been the most difficult bolt. The front one, I'm not too sure what I'm gonna have to do. I'm gonna take this plate off to get to that. But if that's the hardest bolt on this side, at least for getting it out, it's not making me want to do something I don't want to say. But we'll just see how the other side goes. I have the 3 on each side, which is essentially the bottom 3, but the furthest back ones off. Looking at it, if my light worked, I'm going to see if I can get the front lower one. It's way the fuck up in there underneath or above the AC compressor. I think it actually might be easier to get from above. I won't be able to see it, but I think with how the ratchet's going to sit in there, it'll probably be the better option to go. And then I still got to get the EGR tube off. So that's going to be the first thing I got to take off, because don't make it the last thing you take off. You want the header still, or the manifold still on the head, because if you loosen it, now there's not really anything to pry against and the whole thing's twisted. I have all of the bolts loose. The front lower one and all of the top ones were easiest to get from above, and the other 3 lower ones were easiest to get from underneath. Now, I don't know which way is going to be easier for the manifolds to come out. Either it's going to be from the top or the bottom. So I'm going to try the top first before I have to raise the car up. So let's try to get it out from up here. I'm kind of guessing it's not going to happen. Fun fact for anyone who's trying to do this at home, the EGR tube is a 27 millimeter. It's a pretty big guy. All right. What is in the way? Oh. Okay, I'm just gonna drop it because coming up through the top is not happening. But I don't know if you can see in there. Yeah, we got so manifold's completely off. And it looks like the gaskets are split in 2 for the OE ones. We have this aftermarket one that's all one side, or one gasket. So we'll see how well that works. But at least we have a few studs in there. Passenger side will definitely be easier to take out here. The key thing is the driver's side. That, and I gotta find one of the nuts that fell in. I don't know where it went. Someone marked the column already, so I'm gonna unbolt this. That way we can pull the column off to the side, and then we should be able to get this manifold out, and that should also allow us to put the new manifold in, hopefully, without much of a fight. There we go. It's always nice when they come out nice and easy. The big thing will be if it actually separates nice and easy as well. Oh, kind of nice and easy. I got it, but I had to get creative with a few things to be able to get it. There we go. So both out. I guess the next trick is getting the new ones in, and hopefully, I guess they're not as terrible as I thought they would be, but we'll see until the end. So I'm pulling the dipstick tube out because the header company did take into account that the dipstick goes right here, which means that the manifold flange, if we left the dipstick where it was, would have crushed the dipstick against the cylinder head, because the OEM ones had an actual slot for the dipstick to sit in. But I guess it costs too much to make one like an OEM thing, so they make it annoying. Now I gotta fight the dipstick out, which I'm guessing I actually have to lower the car. Come on, suspension bolt. But not impossible. Just a lot of clanking, eh? There we go. Okay, now it's on there and the gasket's actually where it should be. I just spent the last few minutes taking the nuts off of all of the studs because I found out that you can't get the studs in with how those runners are done on the new long tube headers. So now I'm gonna have to fight the header out a little bit, thread all of the studs in, and then I'll be able to put the nuts on, and I still honestly don't know how I'm going to get to all of them. All right, so I went through and put all the studs in the engine. The driver's side I got back in, but it seems like the holes aren't lining up with the actual studs, so before I lower it and see what's going on with that, I'm gonna see if this side fits. And of course the gasket is not wanting to stay on, but we'll see how easy this goes in. Or not at all. Wonder, you know what, I'm gonna take this bar out and maybe that'll allow this pipe to actually go up in there easily, because right now I don't see how it's gonna work. Worst case scenario, we have to take the starter off, but putting the starter back on, I don't want to take the starter off. Ooh. That I don't think is going on with the starter end. The only other thing I'm thinking about doing is if I unbolt the engine mounts, if we can push the engine up enough to give me some room. Worth a shot. We have it propped up as much as stuff around it will allow. So this is our last ditch effort before I take the starter off. Come on. Yeah. I'm gonna leave it lifted like this with the engine up, but That starter has to come off. Fingers crossed this will work this time. Come on. Ah, the gasket fell. Why? Why? On that side, I'm pretty sure this side's gonna be the same, but I don't know how I'm gonna even tighten half the bolts because I can't get shit in there. And on this, like, the easiest way to get to one of them would be to take off the entire oil filter housing assembly, which goes underneath the motor mount to the front of the engine. The passenger side header is now in. I had to remove the motor mount bracket, that thing, that black thing right there, in order for the me and Fred to be able to get the header squeezed in there. And now the header still won't actually mate to the flange because I had to lift up the engine to the side to be able to get the motor mount out, or the bracket. And because of that, it's hitting back here and it's hitting the frame up there and the cross member and everything while I'm trying to push it up. So now I have to kind of lower everything in while tightening stuff. It's just horrible. All right, the headers are now in and tight. I know we didn't show you much of me tightening any of it, or me or Fred tightening any of it, because we can't see most of it anyways. It's so snug in there. Most of it we had to do by feel. A few of them we had to do, you know, we could see the nut or the bolt, but it just wasn't easy. These are kind of what saved us. So the manifolds came with a bolt kit, but I don't know, I like the studs and the nuts. It's much easier to put the gaskets on. They're 13s instead of, I think, like 10s or 3/8 for the other ones. So they might be easier, they might be just as hard, and now you also have to line up the gaskets with it because there's nothing to hang the gasket off. So these were our saving grace, actually. We didn't use any ratchets or sockets to put it on there, just because there's only one spot where you can actually fit a ratchet. This was what we used for some. This one we actually were able to use for only one of them. This is what I used for the others. So I'm gonna explain to you right now what I had to do. That way you kind of have a recap of everything if you're watching this, to try to do long tubes yourself. So we took off the intake, the battery, right? EGR tube comes off. For the passenger side, we had to take out the motor mount bracket. That's in the way. You can't get this manifold in with that motor mount bracket there. On this side, we had to take out the dipstick tube, the column, the steering column, and then we also had to take off the nuts or the bolts that hold this coolant line. This coolant line goes all the way back to behind the cylinder head above the transmission, so it's really long, but we had to take off those bolts as well. Getting everything in, the top bolts on this side and the front one over here are pretty easy to get to. You can tighten them relatively easy. The second one on this, above the motor mount, is where I had to use the stubby. This actually came in and I was able to get in there and tighten it. It was really hard. The two behind it, the lower ones behind it, I had to use this wrench, and for most of them I had to actually flip it each turn. So you're gonna be there for a while. The other side, the top ones are a little harder. You use an open end wrench on them because of how close the tubing is to the stud. You also have to make sure that you put all of the nuts on loose, because the manifold, if you do it with the studs, the manifold is too close to the cylinder head to actually put the nuts on if it's tight. And then on the other side, the lower ones you were able to get with the ratcheting 13, which was really easy because the starter was out of the way. You can put all 3 starter bolts in. It's not horrible. So last thing to do right now is get the X pipe on, put everything back on that we took off, the intake and everything. But the hard part is done, and that's how I was able to get the hard part done. So if you're gonna try to do this at home on the floor, good luck.